Number 10. The Godless country in the heart of Europe. How did one of Europe's least religious countries become one of its most orderly societies? That question follows you almost everywhere in Czechia, a land where magnificent church towers rise above ancient streets. Yet religion plays a surprisingly small role in the everyday lives of many people. Looking at a map of Europe, and Czechia seems almost perfectly placed in the middle of the continent. Germany lies to the west, Poland to the north, Slovakia to the east, and Austria to the south. The entire country covers about 78,000 square kilometers, or around 30,000 square miles. That makes it relatively small. Yet within those borders you can travel from medieval towns and rolling farmland to forested hills, wine, country, and cities filled with centuries of history. Around 10.9 million people live here in 2026, a population small enough to fit inside one of the world's largest megacities. Yet Czechia has developed an identity that feels far larger than its population suggests. At its heart stands Prague, the capital and the country's economic, cultural, and tourism center. Walk through the city early in the morning and the scene can feel almost frozen in another century. Stone streets twist beneath Gothic towers. Baroque churches dominate quiet squares. Ancient bridges cross the Vltava River while castle walls watch from the hills above. You might naturally assume that religion remains deeply rooted in Czech daily life. But that is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Czechia is known as one of Europe's most secular societies. Many people do not identify with an organized religion, and for much of the population, faith is considered a private matter rather than something that shapes everyday public life. The churches remain, but today many are as important for their history, architecture, music, and cultural heritage as they are for worship. And yet the country did not become chaotic when religion lost much of its influence. Czech society is often described as reserved, practical, and deeply protective of personal freedom. People may not immediately smile at strangers or fill every silence with conversation, but public life can feel remarkably calm and organized. There is a strong sense that you should be free to live as you choose, as long as you respect the space and freedom of everyone around you. To understand Czechia, however, you have to look beyond Prague. The historic lands of Bohemia dominate the west, surrounding Prague with forests, castles, spa towns, and old villages. Travel east and you enter Moravia, where vineyards, wine cellars, folk traditions, and cities such as Brno reveal another side of Czech identity. A smaller part of historical Silesia stretches across the northeast. Even the names can confuse visitors. Czech Republic is the formal political name, while Czechia is its official short form. Much like France is the short form of the French Republic. Small, landlocked, and remarkably secular, Czechia challenges expectations almost immediately. Ancient churches stand above modern streets, old traditions survive beside liberal attitudes, and millions of people have built an orderly society where morality does not necessarily begin with religion. And that contradiction is only the first Czech surprise. Number 9. The surprising truth about Czech women.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Beautiful, educated, and independent. But why do many foreigners find Czech women surprisingly difficult to approach? Walk through Prague on an ordinary afternoon, and you may quickly understand where the reputation begins. Along the cobblestone streets, inside quiet cafes, on crowded trams, or beneath the old buildings surrounding the city center, Czech women often stand out without appearing to make much effort to do so. The style is usually understated rather than extravagant. Simple clothes, natural makeup, bright eyes, and a calm sense of confidence create an impression that feels distinctly Central European. But appearance is only the surface of the story. One of the biggest mistakes visitors can make is reducing Czech women to the familiar stereotype of beautiful women from Eastern or Central Europe. Modern Czech society tells a much more interesting story. Women are highly visible in universities, professional workplaces, businesses, medicine, science, education, and the creative industries. For many younger Czech women, having an education, building a career, and maintaining financial independence are simply normal parts of adulthood. That independence also influences relationships. In Prague especially, you will find women building careers, traveling internationally, living alone, and making their own decisions about when or whether to settle down. A relationship may be important, but it does not automatically become the center of a woman's identity. That can surprise foreign visitors who arrive with outdated expectations about gender roles in this part of Europe. And then comes the part many outsiders misunderstand. Czech dating culture can feel surprisingly reserved. If you come from a place where strangers smile constantly, start conversations in grocery stores, or exchange compliments within minutes of meeting, the Czech Republic may require some adjustment. Czech people in general tend to value privacy and personal space, and women are no exception. A stranger approaching with excessive enthusiasm may not receive the warm reaction he expects. That does not necessarily mean rejection. It often means you are still a stranger. Small talk is not always treated as a social requirement here. There can be less pressure to fill every silence with words. And friendliness is not necessarily measured by how widely someone smiles during the first conversation. Czech women may appear serious, cautious, or emotionally distant when meeting someone new, particularly if the approach feels too aggressive or artificial. For travelers accustomed to immediate friendliness, that reserve can easily be mistaken for coldness. But spend more time here, and another side begins to appear. Once trust develops, conversations can become direct, humorous, and surprisingly open. Czech culture tends to appreciate sincerity more than exaggerated politeness. Instead of trying too hard to impress someone, being relaxed, respectful, and genuine often makes far more sense. And do not assume Prague represents every Czech woman. The capital is the country's most international city. Students, professionals, tourists, expatriates, and international companies constantly move through it. English is common among many younger people. International dating is easier, and attitudes can feel more cosmopolitan. Travel to Brno and the atmosphere changes. This university city has a youthful energy, a strong technology sector, lively cafes, and a large student population. Yet the pace can feel less intense than Prague. Continue toward Ostrava, and you encounter another personality, shaped partly by the industrial history of the region. Then move into smaller towns and villages, where family networks can be stronger, social circles tighter, and traditional expectations somewhat more visible. There is no single Czech lifestyle. That is important because online videos sometimes present Czech women as though millions of individuals share the same personality, appearance, and expectations. Reality is far more complicated. A university student in Prague, an engineer in Brno, a professional in Ostrava, and a woman living in a Moravian village may experience completely different social worlds. Even beauty itself is approached differently. What visitors often notice is not simply hair color, eye color, or facial features. It is the combination of appearance and attitude. There is often less need to perform friendliness for strangers, and less pressure to turn every encounter into a social event. Someone can sit alone in a cafe, walk through the city alone, or travel independently without treating solitude as something unusual. For a visitor, the best approach is therefore surprisingly simple. Forget the stereotypes. Do not assume friendliness means romantic interest, and do not assume reserve means rejection. Respect personal space. Avoid treating women as a tourist attraction. Learn a little about the culture. Listen more than you perform. And allow conversations to develop naturally. Because perhaps the most surprising truth about Czech women is not that many visitors consider them beautiful. It is that behind that reputation stands a generation of women who are educated, increasingly independent, internationally connected, and perfectly comfortable deciding for themselves how they want to live. And if that quiet confidence seems difficult to read at first, perhaps that is exactly the point. Number 8. The beer capital of the world is changing. If there is one country where beer feels less like a drink and more like a piece of national identity, it is Czechia. Step into a neighborhood pub on an ordinary evening and you will understand almost immediately. There may be no flashing lights, no elaborate cocktails, and no reason to celebrate anything in particular. Friends sit around wooden tables after work. Families linger over dinner. Conversations drift through the room while fresh glasses arrive with thick white foam rising above the golden beer. For Czechs, this is not necessarily a wild night out. It is simply life. Beer has been woven into Czech social culture for generations. It accompanies meals, friendships, celebrations, hockey games, and quiet evenings when nothing special is happening at all. The local pub can function almost like a neighborhood living room, a familiar place where people meet, argue, laugh, and return again the following week. And Czechia's influence on beer stretches far beyond its borders. To understand why, travel west from Prague to the city of Plzeň. In the 19th century, local brewers there helped create a beer that would eventually transform drinking habits around the world. Pilsner. The original Pilsner Urquell emerged in Plzeň in the 19th century with a clear golden appearance, crisp character, and distinctive bitterness. At the time, many beers were darker and cloudier. The new style looked different, tasted different, and quickly attracted attention. Its influence spread far beyond Czech lands. Today, countless pale lagers around the world owe part of their identity to the brewing revolution that began in this Czech city. You may have tasted its influence many times without realizing that the trail leads back to Plzeň. But great Czech beer begins long before anything reaches the glass. Travel northwest toward the area around Žatec, and the landscape reveals another part of the story. Here grow the celebrated Saz hops, prized by brewers for their delicate aroma and characteristic bitterness. These fields helped shape the flavor associated with classic Czech lager, connecting the drink not only to breweries and pubs, but also to the soil itself. Then there is Budvar, another famous name in Czech brewing, produced in České Budějovice. Together with historic breweries, small local producers, and modern craft brewers, it reveals just how deeply brewing runs through Czech culture. Even the price can surprise visitors. You may hear travelers claim that beer is cheaper than water in Czechia. Sometimes, in certain pubs or restaurants, a draft beer can indeed cost less than a bottle of branded mineral water. But do not treat this as a universal law. Prices vary enormously depending on the city, neighborhood, restaurant, and whether you are drinking beside a tourist landmark or inside a local pub far from the crowds. Still, the fact that the comparison can happen at all tells you something about the place beer occupies here. There are rules, too. When Czechs raise their glasses and say na zdraví, meaning to your health, eye contact matters. There is even a playful superstition that failing to look the other person in the eyes while toasting can bring years of bad luck in love. Whether everyone believes it is another question, but if you are drinking with locals, making eye contact is the safer choice. Yet something unexpected is happening inside this legendary beer nation. Czechia is changing. Traditional beer consumption has been under pressure, and younger generations do not necessarily drink in exactly the same way their parents or grandparents did. Health concerns, Changing social habits, higher prices, and new lifestyles are reshaping what people order and how often they visit traditional pubs. One of the clearest signs is the rise of non-alcoholic beer. What was once treated by some drinkers as a poor substitute has become a serious and increasingly visible part of the market. Breweries are investing more attention in alcohol-free varieties, while consumers have more choices than they once did. A person can enjoy the taste and social ritual of beer without necessarily wanting the alcohol that traditionally came with it. That shift creates a fascinating contradiction. Czechia remains inseparable from beer. Pilsen still carries the legacy of Pilsner. Saaz hops still connect modern glasses to agricultural traditions, stretching back generations. Historic breweries continue producing some of the country's most recognizable drinks, and the neighborhood pub remains an important piece of Czech social life. But traditions do not survive by remaining frozen. They survive by changing with the people who practice them. Perhaps that is what makes Czech beer culture so interesting today. You are not simply watching an old tradition preserved behind glass. You are watching it evolve in real time. The country that helped teach the world to love golden lager is now discovering new ways to enjoy it. And in the world's legendary beer nation, even the beer itself is learning how to change. Number 7. Czech foods tourists completely misunderstand. One of Prague's most famous foods is not really from Prague. But before we uncover that little tourist secret, you need to understand what real Czech food actually tastes like. Walk into a traditional Czech restaurant on a cold afternoon and forget everything about delicate portions. Czech cuisine was shaped by Central European winters, farming traditions, and generations of families who wanted food that could keep you warm and satisfied for hours. Plates arrive heavy with slow-cooked meat, thick sauces, dumplings, cabbage, and rich soups. It is comforting, filling, and proudly uncomplicated. And perhaps no dish captures that feeling better than svikova. At first glance, it may seem unusual. Tender beef arrives beneath a smooth, creamy sauce made with root vegetables. Beside it sit soft bread dumplings ready to absorb every drop. Then comes the surprise, a spoonful of cranberry sauce that adds a sweet and slightly tart contrast to the richness of the meat and cream. It should not work as well as it does, but it does. For many Czechs, svikova is more than something ordered from a restaurant menu. It carries memories of Sunday lunches, family kitchens, and recipes passed from one generation to another. Ask several Czech families who makes the best version, and you may receive several completely different answers, each delivered with absolute confidence. Then there is goulash. Visitors sometimes associate the dish entirely with Hungary, but Czech goulash has developed its own identity. It is usually thick, deeply savory, and commonly served with bread dumplings rather than eaten as a soup. The dumplings are essential. Tear into one and let it soak up the dark sauce. And suddenly you understand why bread in Czech cooking does not always arrive in a basket. Sometimes it arrives as part of the meal itself. Another classic combination brings roast pork together with dumplings and cabbage. Rich meat, soft dumplings, and slightly sour cabbage create the kind of meal that makes much more sense after spending a winter day walking through cold streets. But Czech food also knows how to be wonderfully simple. Take fried cheese. A thick piece of cheese is breaded, fried until crisp outside and molten inside, then commonly served with potatoes or tucked into a bun as quick street food. It is hardly designed for someone counting calories. That is precisely part of its charm. Sausages appear everywhere from pubs to outdoor events, while soups remain an important part of traditional meals. Potato soup, garlic soup, and other hearty varieties can turn a cold day into something considerably more comfortable. Yet one of the most interesting Czech food traditions does not begin in a kitchen. It begins in the forest. When mushroom season arrives, Forests across the country become part pantry, part classroom, and part family gathering place. Parents and grandparents pass down knowledge about where mushrooms grow, which ones belong in the basket, and which ones should never be touched. For many families, mushroom hunting is not simply a way of collecting free food. It is a ritual. People return home with baskets filled from the forest, then dry, cook, preserve, or add the mushrooms to soups and sauces. It is one of those quiet traditions tourists may never notice because it happens far away from souvenir shops and crowded squares. And that brings us back to Prague. Walk through the historic center and eventually you will smell something sweet drifting through the streets. Follow it and you will probably find trdelník, a cylindrical pastry cooked around a rotating spit, coated with sugar, and often filled today with everything from cream to ice cream. The signs may make it look ancient. The location may make it feel unmistakably Czech. With Gothic towers rising behind the shop, the illusion becomes almost perfect. There is only one problem. Trdelník is not the ancient Prague specialty many visitors assume it to be. Its historical roots are connected more closely with other parts of Central Europe, including Hungarian and Slovak traditions. It was not a defining food of Old Prague in the way modern tourist streets sometimes suggest. Its explosion in popularity in the Czech capital came much later as tourism transformed the historic center. That does not mean you should not eat one. It can still be delicious. Just understand what you are buying. If you want to discover Czech cuisine, step away from the brightest tourist signs. Find a neighborhood restaurant, order svíkova or goulash. Try the dumplings. Taste fried cheese. Watch what locals order with their beer. And if autumn brings you into the countryside, look toward the forest, where families may be gathering ingredients the same way generations before them did. Because the real taste of Czechia is not found in one famous pastry. It is found in warm kitchens, crowded pubs, forest baskets, grandmother recipes, and heavy plates placed on the table after a cold day outside. And sometimes, the food tourists photograph the most tells you the least about the country they came to discover. Number 6. The crazy festivals and strange traditions tourists never expect. Imagine walking through Prague on a cold December evening, when suddenly you see a horned devil coming toward you. Beside him walks an angel dressed in white, and between them stands Saint Nicholas. Children gather nervously. Some smile, some hide behind their parents, and others begin desperately trying to remember whether they have behaved well enough this year. Welcome to Mikuláš, one of the most unforgettable Czech traditions. Every December, groups dressed as Saint Nicholas, an angel, and a devil appear in streets, squares, and neighborhoods across the country. The characters represent reward and punishment. Children may sing a song or recite a poem, and those who have behaved well traditionally receive small treats. The devil is there to frighten the naughty ones, although today the custom is generally much more playful than terrifying. For a visitor who knows Czechia mainly as a modern and highly secular society, the scene can feel wonderfully strange. Yet Mikuláš is only the beginning. When spring approaches, another unusual tradition lights up the Czech night. It is called Palení čarodějník, commonly translated as burning of the witches. Despite the dramatic name, this is not a celebration of historical witch persecution. It is a folk tradition connected with welcoming spring and symbolically driving away winter and harmful forces. Communities gather around large bonfires, while witch figures may be placed on top of the flames. In some places, children and adults dress as witches, complete with pointed hats, dark clothing, and painted faces. As darkness falls, flames rise against the night sky. Families gather around the fire, sausages are roasted, drinks are shared, and what sounds sinister from the name becomes a lively community celebration. Then comes Masopust. If you encounter a traditional Masopust procession without knowing what is happening, you might wonder whether you have wandered into a dream. Masked figures move through village streets wearing colorful costumes. Some resemble animals, others represent strange characters drawn from local tradition. Music follows the procession while neighbors gather outside their homes, food and drinks are shared, and the entire community becomes part of the performance. Masopust is the Czech carnival season before Lent, historically a final period of feasting and celebration before a more restrained religious season. Today, even in a society where many people are not religious, the tradition survives as a powerful expression of local identity. And Easter brings another custom that often leaves foreign visitors asking questions. It is called pomlaska. Traditionally, boys and men carry braided willow switches decorated with ribbons and symbolically tap girls and women on Easter Monday. The old folk belief connects the willow branches with youth, health, and vitality. In return, decorated eggs, sweets, or drinks may be offered. To outsiders, the tradition can sound particularly strange, and even within Czechia, attitudes toward it vary. Some families continue it enthusiastically as playful folklore. Others practice a gentler version, while some people choose not to participate at all. Understanding that difference is important. Czech traditions are alive, and living traditions naturally change from one generation to the next. But Czech celebration is not trapped in the distant past. In Prague, the Prague Spring International Music Festival fills concert halls with classical music and performers from around the world. Despite its name, it should not be confused with the political Prague Spring of the 20th century. This is a major cultural festival with roots in the city's musical life. Travel west to Karlovy Vary, and the atmosphere changes again. The elegant spa town became an international center of cinema during the Karlovy Vary International Film Festival. Actors, directors, journalists, and movie lovers fill streets better known for mineral springs and grand old hotels. Head east into Moravia, and wine takes over. In towns surrounded by vineyards, wine festivals celebrate the harvest with traditional costumes, music, dancing, local food, and cellars filled with regional wines. It is a different Czechia from the beer halls of Prague, revealing how dramatically culture can change within one small country. Then winter returns. Christmas markets illuminate historic squares. Wooden stalls appear beneath church towers. Hot drinks, warm frozen hands, decorations glow against medieval buildings, and the smell of food drifts through the cold evening air. That may be the greatest surprise of Czech festivals. Czechia is modern, secular, technologically advanced, and deeply connected to contemporary Europe. Yet beneath that modern surface, ancient customs remain remarkably visible. Devils still walk beside angels. Witches still gather around spring bonfires. Masked characters still parade through villages. Willow branches still appear at Easter, while wine harvests, music festivals, film celebrations, and Christmas markets continue filling the calendar. Czechia may have moved away from religion more than many European societies, but it never abandoned tradition. And sometimes, the strangest way to understand modern Czechia is to put on a mask and follow the parade. Number 5. The Czech Republic beyond Prague. Prague is not the Czech Republic. It may sound strange to say that about a city so deeply connected with the country's image, but many travelers make the same mistake. They arrive in Prague, cross the Charles Bridge, photograph the castle, drink a Czech beer, and leave believing they have seen the country. In reality, they have barely opened the door. Travel south from the capital, and the crowds slowly disappear. Forests and farmland replace busy streets. Villages appear between green hills, and eventually you reach Český Krumlov, a medieval town wrapped inside a dramatic curve of the Vltava River. From above, the town looks almost unreal. Red-tiled roofs crowd together beneath a magnificent castle. Narrow lanes twist between centuries-old buildings, and the river curls around the historic center like a ribbon. Walk through the old streets early in the morning, before most visitors arrive, and it can feel as if modern Europe has briefly vanished. The castle dominates the skyline, while viewpoints above the town reveal one of Czechia's most memorable panoramas. But the magic is not found only in grand buildings. It is in the little courtyards, stone passages, riverside cafes, and quiet corners where you suddenly realize how much history has survived within such a compact place. Then head west, and Czechia changes character again. Karlovy Vary feels less like a medieval town and more like an elegant European retreat from another age. Colorful buildings rise along a narrow valley. Grand hotels overlook the streets, and long colonnades shelter mineral springs that have attracted visitors for generations. Here, people do something that can look unusual at first. Instead of simply bathing in the thermal waters, visitors traditionally sip mineral water from special spa cups as they walk between the springs. The town developed around the idea of healing, rest, and slow movement. Karlovy Vary also reveals Czechia's glamorous side when its international film festival transforms the spa town into a gathering place for filmmakers, actors, journalists, and movie lovers. But travel east into Moravia and yet another Czechia appears. Forget the image of endless beer for a moment. This is wine country. Vineyards roll across gentle hills. Small villages sit among fields of grapes. And beneath some streets lie wine cellars where local families have stored and produced wine for generations. Around harvest season, music, traditional clothing, food, and local wine turn otherwise quiet towns into lively celebrations. Brno, Moravia's largest city, brings a more youthful energy. Universities, cafes, technology companies, historic architecture, and nightlife give it a personality distinct from Prague. It feels less overwhelmed by international tourism and often offers visitors a closer look at ordinary Czech urban life. And even Prague itself hides a few details that many tourists walk straight past. Near the historic center is an extraordinarily narrow passage, often described as a tiny street, measuring only about 19 inches, or roughly 48 centimeters, across at its narrowest point. Two people cannot comfortably pass each other, so traffic lights at the entrances tell pedestrians when it is their turn to walk through. Then there is the Prague astronomical clock. Installed in the early 15th century, it has watched generations gather beneath it. When the hour arrives, moving figures appear, and a small mechanical performance begins above the crowd. Legends surrounding the clock have grown almost as famous as the mechanism itself, adding mystery to something already extraordinary. But Prague should be the beginning of your journey, not the end. Beyond the capital lie castle towns wrapped by rivers, elegant spa resorts built around mineral springs, vineyards stretching across Moravian hills, underground wine cellars, quiet villages, forests, and cities living at a completely different rhythm. That is the secret many short trips miss. Come to Czechia for Prague if you want. Just do not leave believing Prague is all you came to see. Number 4. How expensive is life in Czechia in 2026? Czechia still has a reputation as one of those European countries where your money can stretch surprisingly far. But in 2026, there is one question worth asking. Cheap for tourists, but is it still cheap for the people who actually live here? Start in Prague. And the answer becomes complicated very quickly. Housing is the biggest pressure. A modest apartment in the capital can easily consume a large share of a local salary, especially for someone determined to live alone. Depending on the neighborhood, size, condition, and distance from the center, a small apartment can commonly push toward about 20,000 Czech koruna per month, or roughly $950 before some utilities are added. Move farther from the center and prices can fall. Share an apartment and the situation becomes much easier. But for a young worker trying to rent alone in Prague, the beautiful city suddenly feels far less affordable than it does during a weekend vacation. Brno is generally somewhat easier, although housing there has also become expensive. Ostrava and many smaller Czech cities can offer noticeably more breathing room, especially for residents willing to trade the international energy of Prague for quieter neighborhoods and lower housing costs. Then look at salaries. During the first quarter of 2026, the average gross monthly wage across Czechia reached about 50,280 Czech koruna, or roughly $2,400 before taxes. Real wages were growing again, which offered some relief after years when inflation had squeezed household budgets. But average does not mean typical. High earners pull the average upward. So many Czech workers take home considerably less than that headline figure. That is why rent can feel so painful. If a worker earns around the national average before taxes and then spends a large part of the resulting take-home pay on housing, the word cheap begins to lose its meaning. Daily life, however, can still be manageable. Cook at home, shop carefully, and use public transportation. And Czech cities can remain reasonable compared with many major capitals farther west. A casual restaurant meal might cost around $10 to $15, while a coffee may be around $3. A local beer can still be surprisingly inexpensive away from the most tourist-heavy streets. Transportation is where Prague really fights back against the high cost of housing. The city has an extraordinary network of trams, buses, and metro lines. In 2026, a 30-minute electronic ticket costs about 36 Czech koruna, or around $1.70. A 90-minute electronic ticket is about 46 Czech koruna, or roughly $2.20. For residents, the value becomes even clearer. An annual public transportation pass costs about 3,650 Czech koruna, or around $175. Spread across an entire year, that is remarkably cheap for access to a transportation system that can carry you across much of the capital without owning a car. And then there is work. Czechia has a highly industrialized economy, with opportunities in automotive production, manufacturing, engineering, information technology, cybersecurity, tourism, finance, and international business service centers. Prague attracts multinational companies and technology workers. Brno has developed a strong reputation for universities, engineering, research, and technology. Industrial regions continue to support manufacturing and specialized technical jobs. For foreigners, language can change the equation. Some international companies offer positions where English is enough, particularly in technology and multinational business services. In tourism and local customer-facing jobs, Czech becomes far more important. But there is another group for whom Czechia can feel dramatically cheaper. Remote workers and foreigners earning Western European or American salaries may experience the country very differently. Imagine earning several thousand US each month while paying Czech prices for transportation, groceries, restaurants, and many services. Suddenly, Prague can appear like excellent value, even with rising rent. Earn a local salary, however, and the picture changes. That is the real story of Czechia in 2026. It is neither extremely cheap nor impossibly expensive. A visitor buying beer and tram tickets may wonder how Prague can still be so affordable. A young Czech searching for an apartment may wonder how anyone could possibly call it cheap. Same city, same streets, same prices, two completely different realities. And that may be the most important number of all. Not how much something costs, but how much of your life you must work to afford it. Number 3. The tiny country that helped invent the modern world. Every time you say the word robot, you are unknowingly carrying a tiny piece of Czech history with you. That may sound surprising, but it is only the beginning. For a country of around 10.9 million people, Czechia has left an extraordinary mark on science, literature, engineering, and technology. Behind the medieval castles and beer halls lies another country, one filled with inventors, researchers, writers, engineers, and ideas that traveled far beyond Central Europe. Start with the robot. The word became famous through the Czech writer Karel Čapek and his play RUR, published in the early 20th century. The story imagined artificial workers created to serve humans, only for the relationship between creator and creation to take a much darker turn. The term was suggested by Čapek's brother Joseph and came from the Czech word robota, associated historically with forced labor or compulsory work. Think about that for a moment. Today, robots assemble cars, explore dangerous environments, perform industrial tasks, and have become symbols of our technological future. Yet the word used around the world traces its popular origin to a Czech play written more than a century ago. Then there is something far smaller, but something millions of people place directly onto their eyes: the soft contact lens. Czech chemist Otto Wichterle played a crucial role in developing practical soft contact lenses using innovative materials. The most memorable part of the story is how modest some of his early experimental equipment was. He famously constructed a homemade device using simple mechanical parts, including pieces from a children's construction set. A global medical product emerging from an improvised Czech experiment sounds almost too perfect to be true. But Czechia's scientific story reaches even deeper. Travel to Brno, the largest city in Moravia, and you encounter the legacy of Gregor Mendel. Working with pea plants, Mendel carefully observed how particular characteristics passed from one generation to another. His experiments helped establish principles that later became fundamental to modern genetics. The garden where those ideas developed was far removed from the enormous laboratories we associate with genetics today. Yet the questions Mendel explored eventually transformed our understanding of heredity, biology, agriculture, and medicine. Czech influence also entered the world through literature. Walk through Prague and you enter the city associated with Franz Kafka, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. Its narrow streets, imposing buildings, offices, and shifting political world formed part of the environment around him. Kafka became so influential that his name eventually produced an adjective, Kafkaesque. Today, people use it to describe situations that feel absurd, confusing, oppressive, or trapped inside endless bureaucracy. Few writers influence language so deeply that their surname becomes a way of describing reality itself. Then Czech innovation moves from books and laboratories onto the road. Skoda grew from industrial roots in the Czech lands into one of the country's most recognizable international manufacturing names. Its story reflects something Czechia has been remarkably good at for generations: engineering. Manufacturing remains deeply connected to the national economy. Automotive production, machinery, electronics, precision engineering, and technical research all help reveal why this small Central European country has developed such a strong industrial identity. But modern Czechia is not living entirely on inventions from the past. Brno has become an important center for technology and research, while Prague attracts software companies, international technology businesses, and startups. Czech specialists work in cybersecurity, engineering, scientific research, and advanced manufacturing. Then there is gaming. Czech developers have built internationally successful video games, proving that some of the country's modern exports are no longer made from steel or glass. They are made from code, imagination, and digital worlds. That contrast is what makes Czechia so fascinating. You can spend the morning walking beneath Gothic towers, pass buildings connected to Kafka, board a tram through a city shaped by centuries of history, and then enter an office where engineers and programmers are working on technologies belonging entirely to the future. Czechia may look small on a map. Its population could disappear inside one of the world's largest urban regions. But size has never determined influence. From the word robot to soft contact lenses, from the foundations of genetics to literature, automobiles, engineering, cybersecurity, and gaming, this country has repeatedly produced ideas that traveled much farther than its borders. Small country, surprisingly enormous influence. And chances are, Czechia has already touched your life in ways you never even noticed. Number 2. How a country split in two without a war. How can an entire country disappear overnight without a single battle? No invading army crossed the border. No cities were bombed. No soldiers fought over territory. Yet when people in Central Europe woke up on the first morning of 1993, Czechoslovakia was gone. In its place stood two independent countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. To understand how something so unusual could happen, we have to travel back through one of the most turbulent chapters of European history. For much of the 20th century, the Czech Republic as we know it today did not exist as a separate state. Czechs and Slovaks shared one country, Czechoslovakia, created in 1918 after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The new state brought together two closely related peoples, but they were never identical. The Czech lands were generally more industrialized and urbanized, while Slovakia had followed a somewhat different historical and economic path. They shared many cultural connections and similar languages, yet each maintained a strong sense of identity. Then Europe descended into war. After the Second World War, Czechoslovakia increasingly fell within the Soviet sphere of influence. A communist government took power, and political life changed dramatically. Private businesses were nationalized, censorship restricted information, and the state gained enormous control over work, travel, media, and public expression. But the desire for greater freedom never disappeared. In 1968, Czechoslovakia became the center of an extraordinary political experiment known as the Prague Spring. Under reformist leader Alexander Dubček, the government attempted to create a more open form of socialism. Censorship loosened, public discussion expanded. People began imagining a society where greater personal freedom could exist without completely abandoning the socialist system. For a brief moment, the atmosphere changed. Then Soviet-led forces entered Czechoslovakia. Tanks appeared in the streets, reforms were crushed, and the country entered another long period of political restriction. For many ordinary people, the lesson was painful. Change had appeared possible, only to vanish beneath the weight of outside military power. But history was not finished. By the late 1980s, communist governments across Eastern and Central Europe were weakening. In Czechoslovakia, demonstrations grew, students filled the streets, and public pressure became impossible to ignore. In November of 1989, the Velvet Revolution began. Crowds gathered in Prague and other cities. Keys jingled above people's heads as a symbolic message that it was time for the old leadership to leave. Demonstrations grew enormous, yet the political transformation remained remarkably peaceful. Within weeks, communist rule collapsed. Dissident playwright Václav Havel, once persecuted by the government, became president. Czechoslovakia had moved toward democracy without the bloody revolution many might have expected. But freedom revealed another question. Did Czechs and Slovaks still want to remain inside the same country? Political disagreements grew over how the federation should work, how power should be divided, and how economic reforms should proceed. Czech and Slovak leaders increasingly imagined different futures. Instead of allowing those disagreements to become violent, political leaders negotiated a separation. And then came one of the strangest New Year's days in modern European history. At the beginning of 1993, Czechoslovakia peacefully ceased to exist. The Czech Republic emerged in the west. Slovakia emerged in the east. Government property and federal institutions were divided. A border now separated people who had belonged to the same state only hours earlier. History would remember the separation as the Velvet Divorce. The name was appropriate. Like the Velvet Revolution before it, the breakup became famous not for violence, but for the remarkable absence of it. The contrast with events elsewhere in Europe was dramatic. During roughly the same period, Yugoslavia was breaking apart in a completely different way. Nationalism, territorial disputes, ethnic tensions, and political collapse contributed to devastating wars that killed and displaced enormous numbers of people. Czechoslovakia faced its own disagreements over national identity and political power, yet reached a radically different conclusion. Negotiation replaced gunfire. That does not mean every Czech or Slovak wanted the country divided. The breakup remains more complicated than the simple romantic image of two nations calmly shaking hands and walking away. Political leaders played a decisive role, and there was no nationwide referendum specifically approving the final separation. Yet the most extraordinary fact remains unchanged. A country disappeared, borders changed, institutions were divided, and two new independent states moved forward without fighting a war against each other. Today, Czechia and Slovakia remain separate nations with close cultural, linguistic, economic, and personal connections. Stand in Prague today, and the old Czechoslovakia can feel like distant history. But beneath the modern streets lies the memory of communist rule, Soviet tanks, peaceful demonstrations, political transformation, and finally an almost unimaginable national divorce. Many countries are born through war. Czechia, in its modern form, emerged from something far rarer, a decision to separate without destroying each other. And in a century filled with violent borders, that may be one of the most remarkable Czech stories of all. Number 1. The truth about life in Czechia tourists rarely see. So, after the castles, beautiful women, beer, festivals, strange traditions, and medieval streets, one question remains. Is Czechia actually a good place to live? To answer that, leave Prague's old town behind. Ride a tram away from the souvenir shops and Gothic towers, and another Czechia slowly appears outside the window. Apartment blocks replace historic palaces. Parents push strollers towards supermarkets. Office workers hurry home carrying groceries. Children return from school. Elderly residents wait quietly at tram stops. And neighborhood pubs fill with familiar faces after work. This is the Czechia tourists rarely photograph. Daily life here can feel remarkably practical. Public transportation connects neighborhoods efficiently. Supermarkets are easy to reach. Parks are scattered through cities. and many residential districts are designed around ordinary routines rather than tourists. Prague may be expensive by local standards, but owning a car is not always necessary when trams, buses, and metro trains can carry you through the city. There is also a sense of order that many visitors notice quickly. According to the latest Global Peace Index available before this script was written, Czechia ranked among the more peaceful countries in the world. But statistics only tell part of the story. The feeling appears in smaller moments, walking through residential streets after dark, seeing families using public transportation late in the evening, or watching people move through parks and neighborhood squares without the constant tension visitors may experience elsewhere. Then there are the Czechs themselves. At first, they can seem difficult to read. They are often private, reserved, straightforward, and not especially interested in performing friendliness for strangers. A cashier may not greet you with enormous enthusiasm. Someone sitting beside you on a tram may remain completely silent. Your new neighbor might take time before starting a conversation. But distance is not necessarily hostility. Once friendship develops, Czech warmth often feels less theatrical and more genuine. People may invite you into their homes, introduce you to family traditions, take you mushroom hunting, or spend an entire evening talking over food and beer. Trust can take time here, but when it arrives, it often means something. And then comes a question tourists almost never ask. What happens when you grow old in Czechia? The country has a public pension system supported largely through social insurance contributions made during working life. Retirement rules depend on factors including year of birth, and reforms are gradually changing the retirement age as Czech society grows older. Healthcare is another important part of the picture. Czechia operates a public health insurance system, meaning retirement does not automatically leave an older person facing the full cost of medical treatment alone. But aging is about much more than doctors. Some elderly people remain independent at home. Others receive help from relatives or community services, while those requiring greater assistance may use home care, day services, or residential social care. One particularly interesting part of the Czech system is called Příspěvek na péči, or the care allowance. It is designed for people whose long-term health condition means they need another person's help with basic activities such as mobility, dressing, eating, hygiene, communication, or managing everyday life. For adults in 2026, support depends on the level of dependency. At the lowest level, the allowance is about 1,300 Czech koruna per month, or roughly $60. At the second level, it rises to about 5,400 Czech koruna, or around $250. For people with heavy dependency, it reaches about 14,800 Czech koruna, or roughly $700 per month. At the highest level, support can reach about 23,000 Czech koruna, or around $1,080 when residential social services provide the care, and about 27,000 Czech koruna, or approximately $1,270 in other qualifying care arrangements. The idea is important. Instead of assuming every person needs the same support, assistance increases as everyday independence becomes more difficult. And in Prague, growing older comes with another surprisingly practical advantage. People aged 60 to 64 can receive discounted public transportation when they meet the required conditions. From age 65, regular public transportation within Prague is free with appropriate proof of age. That means an older resident can board a tram, metro, or regular city bus and continue moving around the capital without paying the standard fare. It may sound like a small benefit, but imagine what it means in everyday life. An elderly person can travel to a supermarket, meet friends, visit family, reach a medical appointment, or simply cross the city without calculating the cost of every journey. Mobility can become part of independence. Still, Czechia is not a retirement paradise. The population is aging, and that creates pressure on pensions, healthcare, and long-term care. Finding enough workers to care for older people is a challenge. Housing costs can be painful for seniors with limited income, particularly for those living alone. And as people live longer, the question of who will provide care becomes increasingly important for families and the government. That is why Czechia is more interesting than the postcard version suggests. It is one of Europe's more secular societies, yet remarkably orderly. It fiercely protects old traditions while building modern technology. It remains famous for beer while younger generations are changing drinking habits. Its people can appear distant at first, yet friendships can become deeply sincere. It can feel affordable to a visitor earning an American salary while feeling expensive to a Czech worker paying Prague rent. And despite being a country of only around 10.9 million people, its ideas have traveled around the planet. Perhaps that is the real Czech secret. This country rarely tries to impress you. It does not need to. Czechia quietly goes about its life, preserving old customs, building modern cities, caring for an aging population, arguing over the future, meeting friends at the pub, catching the tram home, and allowing people a remarkable amount of freedom to live as they choose. The longer you stay, the less Czechia feels like a fairy tale. And strangely enough, that is when it becomes even more fascinating. Hello everyone, and welcome to our travel channel. We are two passionate girls behind this journey, working together to explore beautiful places, unique cultures, local food, and inspiring stories from around the world. Every video we create is made with care, from researching destinations and planning, editing, and sharing the best moments with you. Our goal is to bring you closer to the world, one journey at a time, and help you discover places you may have never seen before. If you enjoy our travel videos, please support us by giving this video a like, subscribing to our channel, and turning on the notification bell so you will not miss our next adventure. Your support means so much to us and motivates our team to keep exploring and creating more amazing travel stories for you.